Hi, cutie. Hi, baby. Hi. You have your little butt rubs? You have your little butt rubs? You have your little butt rubs?
Let's do this, Nina. You ready? Hey y'all, welcome to my channel. I'm Kaylin May. This is Nina. We're going to be doing a review of N.K. Jemisin's The City We Became. So, I just finished this book late last night. I stayed up till like 1 a.m. just to read it. You wanna steal my thunder, baby? And I loved it. I loved it. I really enjoyed reading it. So I gave this book a 5 out of 5. And this is, it was something that I was excited to read, but I was a little unsure of because I haven't actually read fantasy in a long time. I grew up reading a lot of fantasy books, everything from Aragon to those Garth Nix books, I don't remember what they were called, to of course Harry Potter. But as Harry Potter is becoming increasingly disappointing, as J.K. Rowling shows more and more how transphobic and hateful she is, it's good to find other places to go in fantasy. As we think about Harry Potter, even separate from the author's latest statements, it can be criticized and should be criticized for its lack of inclusivity around identities, for an imaginative series that has hippogriffs and dragons and, but can't have an out queer person and only centers white, straight European children. As we think about that lack of imagination is really a disservice that Rowling, did to the Harry Potter universe. And when you see a universe like the one that N.K. Jemisin writes, which is based off of, a real place, New York City, which is a vibrant and diverse place, she doesn't shy away from these different identities. In fact, there are so many diverse characters, whether you look at it from race or gender or sexuality, whether they're immigrants, whether, what experiences they've had growing up, whether they've just moved to New York City or they've been there lifelong. I think that she does a really good job at cutting across a lot of different experiences in her main characters. And by doing this, it made for a more vibrant story. And it felt like it fit in with a world that also had like imaginative tentacled monsters. And we were being asked to imagine that humans could embody cities fully, that they were not only just there to save cities, to interact with cities, but that they were the souls of those cities. They were the avatars of those cities. And I think that this book did a really great job of showing ways that, ways to build characters that feels authentic and genuine, because it is, but that is more representative. And also, when you think about New York, is representative of the people who actually live in New York City. And thinking about the people who lived in Europe and lived specifically in the United Kingdom in the 90s, they weren't just people who looked like Harry Potter. Just to take a quick moment to say that trans women are women, trans men are men, non-binary people are valid and real, and all of these people deserve rights and basic respect and dignity. And it really angers me and saddens me to see J.K. Rowling espousing such hatred and such misinformation and such bigoted, violent language. How the Harry Potter series and fandom lives on beyond J.K. Rowling, I think that this is one of those moments where, as I've heard, the students outgrow the master, right? Like, this fandom is now bigger and better than anything that J.K. Rowling could have done on her own. And in a lot of ways, it's that in spite of her instead of because of her. And so I don't fault people who still want a relationship with the Harry Potter series. And I'm still working out what mine is going to be after all of this. So she's obsessed with J.K. Rowling too. Even though I grew up reading fantasy, as I've grown into adulthood, contemporary fiction tends to be where I reside. So it's been really fun to pick up another fantasy novel. The premise of this book is that there's like a birthing process for cities, and an avatar, a person embodies a city and fights on its behalf against this like great ancient evil. New York City is going through that birthing process, and it has 6 avatars to help it along its way, and we meet each of them separately throughout this book, and then they come together in various ways over the course of it. And I just really loved the way that she personifies New York City. There was a review in The Guardian I read of this before I bought the book by Adam Roberts. And as he put it, this book feels intensely site specific. And I think that's really true. I think that so much of this book is about New York City. It's like a love letter to New York City. And you can't have it separate from the city itself. And so she really plays with this idea, like thinking about a city as large and as diverse as New York. What makes New York, New York? What makes Queens, Queens, and Brooklyn, Brooklyn, and Staten Island, Staten Island, and Manhattan, Manhattan, and the Bronx, the Bronx? Like what makes these boroughs unique? What makes this city unique? What is the heart and soul of it? And so that is just as much a exploration of this book as any of the other storylines. And I thought that was really well done. And it's funny, it like builds, it's like world building based on an actual world, which is kind of cool. I also loved the superhero element. The whole book sort of felt like a slow burn of Avengers Assemble. And one of the things when I think about it within like the context of superheroes, I think there are a lot of superhero comics and movies set in New York. Spider-Man, The Defenders, Captain America. And a lot of these movies and comics have somebody who is like very connected to the city, but not necessarily is the city. So she takes it a step further. So these people aren't just trying to save the city as sort of like a bystander or a separate from, they are the city. And when they're acting as the city, not just on behalf of, and with the guidance of the city, which is very cool. And I think just elevates it and changes it a little bit, makes it feel very unique. My dog is so active right now, guys. I'm so sorry. I love the range of personalities of the different boroughs. I thought she did a really good job of giving them a uniqueness, but still that felt very rooted in place. You really saw where a lot of these perspectives were coming from, and even when they weren't necessarily pleasant or agreeable, you understood kind of how they got where they were and why they were the way they were. Their perspective on the city as a whole, which was really interesting. And I think that this sort of message, and this is a common message I think in a lot of superhero-y type books and comic books and stories just in general, is this idea of like coming together against an enemy, and coming together in this case specifically as a city to defeat a common enemy and sometimes an unseen enemy. And that really resonated as I thought about like the moment we are in history with coronavirus and having to come together to, you know, fight against and keep people safer against this pandemic, against this virus. Or Black Lives Matter, where we're coming together in large numbers to defeat the enemy of racism and white supremacy and police brutality. And in a lot of ways, this coming together, this honoring of these cities, of these people in these cities to come together to defeat these ancient evils. And I'll talk about the enemy a little bit more in depth because I also thought that was really well done. Really resonated with the current time we're in, and I enjoyed that quite a bit. So I want to talk about how she did sort of the enemy, the antagonist in her story, because I thought it was very clever. So it is a kind of, it's a tentacled creature that can shape-shift and travel through multi-dimensional space and time. And it's, you know, it's very sci-fi and fantasy in its presentation, but it shapeshifts into white women who weaponize their whiteness and weaponize their privilege and their power and their money. And the way it manifests is through gentrification and racism in this book and oppressive structures. And so it is both a metaphor for those things and actually uses those things as its weapon, as weapons in this story. And these characters, the city, must fight against this ancient evil of oppressive, racist white women. And I thought that was really well done. There were a couple of passages. One was where the enemy used Starbucks across the city as a stronghold, as a foothold, as it was like entering in this battle. And I thought that was such a clever sort of nod to how Starbucks has been a forefront of gentrification and displacement, and just sort of a symbol of corporate America coming in and just neutralizing a place, taking away its character. Then comes the proof that it's all over for the neighborhood's original character. They passed a Starbucks on the corner. Bronca thinks. She can't be sure because it's so covered in white tendrils and stiffer projections she can barely see a logo or facade. It's like some kind of animal. The overlapping moving layers of white tendrils have given it a kind of brindle-furred appearance, blurring the building's overall boxy shape. She keeps an eye on the bird Starbucks in the rear view, but the thing seems unable to go more than a few feet from its foundations. After glaring at Bronca in the mirror and snapping its glass door beak at her once or twice, it drools foul-looking coffee ground sludge before grudgingly backing into its former position. It's every Starbucks, Brooklyn says, squinting at the street. Starbucks is everywhere, Hung rumbles. All over my city, too. Big chain stores make a city less unique, more like every other place. And it goes on and on. But it's just this idea of, like, I just thought that was so freaking well done. The enemy also uses the redevelopment of a neighborhood. She tears down an old establishment that has been in the Bronx for years and years and years, and buys the property basically to redevelop into condos. And that's seen as an attack on the city. Another moment, she uses a large donation, like a $23 million donation to a art center, to a community center, but it has strings attached, it has requirements. It's sort of like sell your soul a little bit, but get this money, and uses that as another attack. Here's an interaction the enemy, Dr. White, is having with Bronca, who's the Bronx, about her center, her art center. She turns the clipboard around so that Bronca can see the business check attached to it. Frowning, Bronca leans over for a better look and freezes as she sees the amount. $23 million, says White. I believe that would cover a substantial portion of your operating and capital budgets for the next few years. There's a catch, though, of course. Bronca stares at the check. She's never seen so many zeros written out by hand. The last bit makes Bronca frown up at her. Is this a joke? No, would you prefer a wire transfer? White tilts her head. You should have gotten a call from a board member about me, verifying my identity, and that the funds being offered by my foundation definitely exist. Shit, Bronca remembers hanging up on Raul's message before finishing it. Still, this is bullshit. It has to be. People do this sometimes with nonprofits. Dangle money and expect them to hire incompetent relatives, name buildings after dead pedophiles, and so on. And there's actually some wiggle room for all of that. Cost of doing begging for money business, but not as much as people seem to think. Let me make sure I understand you, Bronca says. She's still smiling, although it's taken a hit. You want to make a donation to the Bronx Art Center of $23 million. We're delighted, of course, but you mentioned a catch? Mm-hmm. White's smile has crept back, though not as broadly, becoming instead something sly and smug. We just want you to make room in your gallery for some of the alt artistes' pieces. She holds up a hand quickly as soon as Bronca opens her mouth. You did explain your policy, and I'm in complete agreement, but they have a lot of pieces beyond what they showed you yesterday. I'm sure they've got something almost completely bigotry-free. Let's say you put up 3 of their works. Just 3. It sounds reasonable. Slippery slopes always do. Bronca narrows her eyes. I've seen their videos. Their whole shtick is trying to prove they're being discriminated against because they're a bunch of rich white boys. These are like ways that this enemy attacks the city, but it also is in real life how corporations and oppressive structures, capitalism, displacement, gentrification, all of this attack cities as well. So I thought that was really, really interesting. The other thing she weaponizes quite a bit is xenophobia and fear of others, fear of immigrants, especially when she's talking with a specific borough. And again, just looking at the way she preys on fears, looking on the way that she capitalizes, gets footholds in these places, and how that webs out across the whole city, it was a great metaphor. It was a great way to pit gentrification against New York City in a really creative, thoughtful manner. As with current events, it's going to take more than one showdown to drive out the darkness, and I think we're seeing that in all of the showdowns we're having right now in real life. And so I'm glad it's a series. I'm really excited to read another one of these. I loved the colors, the cover, there's this like beautiful map at the beginning that I just loved. Yeah, the styling and the design of this is just really well done. I will say it did take me a little while, I don't know, like 50 pages, 30 pages. It took me a little while to figure out how to find my way in this. But once I did, I really found my groove, and I couldn't always understand what was happening in the sense of like the metaphysical or like where they were really locating this alternative plane. It sometimes would come in and out, but that was okay. That wasn't as important in the end. I loved this book. It was really fun to read. It was exciting and interesting. And I think that like if you don't like superhero storylines, you might not love it as much. But if you've ever lived in New York, or if you've ever loved New York, this is a book that you will enjoy. If you've never experienced New York, you might, some of it might get lost on you. It's almost written more for people who understand New York than those who are not. But that being said, even if you've never been to New York, I think that like it's approachable enough for you anyway. Basically, I loved this book. I'm glad I read it. I want to read more by N.K. Jemisin. The next book on my list is The Fifth Season, which I've been dying to read for a while now, and definitely will. I think that this is a great book for people who love fantasy. I think this is a great book for people who maybe haven't read fantasy in a while but love New York, or just cities and like thinking about cities, live in cities. So all told, yeah, I gave it a 5 out of 5. I really enjoyed it. And I hope you do too. I will be back on Wednesday with another video. If you can take the time to like and subscribe and comment. I'd love to hear if you've read this book or read anything else by N.K. Jemisin, what you thought. And as always, I'll have donation links for Black Lives Matter, petitions to sign, articles to read down in the description box below. I hope you all are well, and I can't wait to see you guys soon. All right, bye.